YouTube! I am really excited to finally do a wrap-up video of all of the books that I've been reading, kind of spanning from the end of June up until about now, so mid-August. I've managed to read 10 books in that time, which I'm so stoked about. To be fair, Booktubeathon happened in the middle, so that kind of bumped me up. But I'm back on track on my Goodreads reading challenge, which I'm very excited about because I was kind of consistently 2 to 3 books behind. Alright, so the first book that I picked up since the last wrap-up video I made was Highly Illogical Behavior by Cory Whaley. This was a delight. I really enjoyed this book. I loved the characters. This is a book about a kid named Solomon Reed who is agoraphobic and hasn't left his house in something like 2 to 3 years. 3 years. Oh, exactly. 3 years, 2 months, and 1 day. And then a girl named Lisa decides to befriend him because she wants to go to school to be a psychologist or something like that, and ends up becoming very good friends with him, and her boyfriend ends up becoming very good friends with him. It's a very life-changing experience for Solomon and really for the other two as well. I thought this book did such a good job of addressing so many different things. It was so well written and it had a lot of fun like nerdy references to Solomon and Lisa's boyfriend bond over a lot of different things like Star Trek and games and all sorts of things that I love myself. And so this book was a lot of fun and I really highly recommend it. Next book I finished was Scarlett, Epstein Hates It Here. This was a book that I was very excited to read because it touches on fan fiction. I thought that that actually ended up being kind of the weakest part, however. So Scarlett was part of this like online community where she wrote fan fiction about this really popular kind of like sci-fi like teen show that had to do with like vampires or something, or werewolves, I can't remember now. I appreciated the whole, like the show was about to end and so they were all afraid that like the fandom was gonna end. I think we've all been there. And then she gets this idea to like single-handedly save the fandom by writing this like new fanfic with original characters about the show. And I guess that her and her friends are pretty well known in this fandom community, but I don't really personally understand how like tons and tons of people would be excited about that, because as far as I know those kinds of fanfics are usually not the kind that get super popular. And then on top of that, she kind of learned this big life lesson because she's writing her chapters literally about like her friends at school that's mirroring this drama going on, and she like uses their names exactly. Like obviously that's not going to end up well for you, Scarlett. That aside, which I was having a little bit of a hard time like suspending disbelief about that, I really appreciated her kind of interpersonal struggles with her dad and his new wife, and like her neighbor across the street, and the problem that she's having with her sort of best friend in high school. And all of that I thought was really good. I actually thought that the whole fanfic element of it kind of detracted from the story and kind of cheapened it a little bit, but ultimately I did end up liking this book, so I don't know, I had very conflicting feelings about it. The next book I read, I actually don't know where it is. I don't know, I misplaced it, but I read Me Before You by, I don't know how to say her name at all, Jojo Moyes. I know that there's a lot of controversy around this book. I ended up getting a copy for free, and so I just decided to read it. I read it on like an airplane, and I thought it was okay. I mean, I definitely understand why people are upset about it. I don't feel like I have enough personal experience with disability to really speak for other people who could express their feelings about it better than I did. I thought that ultimately the book was like pretty entertaining. I mostly liked the characters and I definitely like wanted to keep reading, but there was this one line in the book that bothered me so much that I kind of thought that it was inexcusable. And it was this really throwaway line where the main character is trying to come up with all of these ideas for how she can entertain Will and like keep him excited and happy. And she says literally, like she says the line, "I was crippled with fear." Which when you are a person who's in charge of a literal quadriplegic, you can't say things like that. And I just don't understand how like the author thought this was okay, and like the editors thought this was okay, and like every single person who signed off on this book thought that the able-bodied person in this book saying that she was crippled with fear was okay. I just don't understand how a mistake like that gets through. It's completely unacceptable. And so while I thought that the book was like fine, that really sort of destroyed the whole thing for me. The next book that I read, moving Moving on, the next book that I read was Tuck Everlasting. I listened to it on audiobook. This was one of the ones that I did for Booktubeathon. It was the book to movie adaptation that I chose, and then I watched the movie. The movie was silly. The movie was very silly, and they made some very silly choices, but it was fun to see young Alexis Bledel being all cute. But the book I actually found to be really delightful. I had actually never read this book before. I'd only seen the movie when I was younger. And Joe and I listened to it on audiobook to and from work over a couple of days, and I just thought it was really fun. It was a super fun book that you can definitely tell is a little bit dated, but otherwise it's still really held up as an entertaining story for me. Then I read the Veronica Mars Mr. Kiss and Tell book. This is the second Veronica Mars novelization that has come out since the new movie where they're all older. And I had heard that this one wasn't as good as the first one, but I definitely disagree. I think this one is at least as good as the first one, if not better. And I think it's because Rob Thomas and Jennifer Graham did some very daring things in this book. I don't read a lot of adult mysteries, but this really made me want to. They broached the topic of like murder, like a series of murders and assaults to like strippers, and how a lot of people in like the police force and law enforcement like won't touch a case like that, and how wrong that is. And I thought it was incredible that this book was willing to tackle this, and that Veronica was so steadfast in wanting to bring justice to these women. And I thought it was fantastic, and I really appreciated that this book did not shy away from really any of the sort of gruesome details that go along with that, and it was so good, and I definitely recommend this to everybody. Although, trigger warning, there's a lot of really sort of heavy, dark things going on in this book. The next book that I read was George by Alex Gino, and I really appreciated it. It was, you know, it's middle grade. It was definitely much below my general reading level, but I thought that it was so nice to read a book for young readers about someone so different than myself. And because of that, I know that there are people out there who are going to read this and see themselves in it, which is so important. As a kid, I was very fortunate that I got to see myself in books all over the place. So this is a book about a little boy who self-identifies as a girl. In fact, the book uses female pronouns the entire way through, and how she doesn't really know how to tell people about this, and she doesn't even know if she should. And it's I don't want to give too much away because it's so great, but I just thought that this book was wonderful, and it does a really important thing for young readers who feel different. Next I read Nimona, which was amazing. Noelle Stevenson has really outdone herself in this. I loved it so much. I've had this on my bookshelf for a little while because I love graphic novels, and I know that this one is one that lots of people are loving, so of course I bought it. And then for some reason I waited to read it, and that was a mistake, because Nimona is one of the most amazing, hilarious characters in a book ever, and both of these guys, I can't remember their names off the top of my head, but Lord Ballaster Blackheart and Sir Ambrosius Goldenloin were, God, I don't even know. So this is a book about how Sir Blackheart is an evil supervillain. Nimona comes on as his sort of assistant, but is always pushing him to be more evil, which is hilarious. And then Sir Goldenloin is their like good nemesis. And it's just so funny. It's hilarious, and you should definitely read it, and it only took me about 2 hours to get through it, and I like immediately wanted to read it again. Next I read Please Ignore Veredites by A.S. King. This was another Booktubeathon book. It took me a lot longer to read this book during Booktubeathon than I would have liked, but mostly just because it's sort of a like very melancholy book, and so it felt like it moved slowly, and so I felt like I had to take it slowly. I ultimately thought it was a pretty good book. It's about this girl, her best friend dies, but they also had sort of been having a falling out kind of right up to his death, and also she knows a little bit more about his death than she lets on as people are kind of trying to figure out what happened. And the book is a lot about her sort of working through all of these difficult things that were going on around her best friend dying, and how she can't ever really talk it through with him. It was written in a very interesting way, really out of order, which I think is really interesting and effective in this book particularly. I don't really have that much more to say. It was just kind of a pretty solid book. Then I finished Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. I've been doing an audiobook listen through of the whole series. I'm in the middle of Prisoner of Azkaban right now, but I finished Chamber of Secrets, and I have been enjoying this reread so much. I don't know why, but I had not reread the Harry Potter books in like over a decade. And so this has been a really enjoyable experience for me because I'm getting to sort of re-experience the books almost like they're new, even though like obviously I know what happens. There's a lot of scenes that I don't remember at all because movie Harry Potter has sort of like taken over in my mind, and there's just scenes that I straight up don't remember, which is so much fun. And I'm just getting to like re-enjoy the magic of Harry Potter. And so I always really liked Chamber of Secrets. I know it's not a lot of people's favorite, but I really, really like Ginny as a character, and I think that it was a really fun book. And so I will have probably many more thoughts about this reread that I'm doing of Harry Potter, and so you'll hear a lot more about it as I go. Last but not least, I read Cursed Child. Again, I'm going to make an entire video about this because there's a lot more to say than I can fit into the end of this wrap up, but I'm feeling very conflicted about how to answer people when they ask me if I liked the book or like what I thought, because ultimately I think that I had a good time reading it and I'm having a great time talking about it, but this is one of the most absolutely ridiculous, absurd, not thought through books I've ever read, and the fact that it is part of the franchise that I love so much is not an excuse for how much of a mess I feel like this book is. So I will make an entire video about this, I promise, and then we can all talk about it and it'll be great. As for what I'm reading right now, I started reading This Is What Happy Looks Like by Jennifer E. Smith. I was really excited about it because it was about people who like meet online and then become friends in real life, and I made it like 128 pages before I stopped reading the book around like 60 pages, and then I was like, no, I'm gonna give it another try. I made it to 128 and I just couldn't. So one of the first books I've DNF'd this year, did not finish. I'm not going to finish. I did not like it. I thought that it was cheesy. I thought that it was unbelievable. I thought that the author could have made such better choices. For instance, they met online. There's plenty of ways that people can believably meet online. They can meet in a forum. They can meet on their favorite website. They can like be introduced to each other by someone else. There's so many, they can meet on like AOL Instant Messenger. Like, I don't even care if it's outdated. There's so many ways to effectively meet someone online your age. And they met by the boy sending an email to someone and having the email address one letter off and reaching this girl instead. And that to me shows that the author probably doesn't actually know how people meet online. And so I just couldn't believe anything else the rest of the book said. So I'm done with that one. Not gonna read any more of it. But I'm currently reading Denton Little's Death Date by Lance Rubin, which is about a boy who lives in a world where everyone knows the day that they're gonna die. Not how they're gonna die, but when. His death date is tomorrow in the book, and it's him going to his like pre-funeral and kind of figuring out like how he wants to spend his last day and wrapping up loose ends. And it's surprisingly funny for being so morbid and having like a hearse on the cover. I don't really know what the plot's gonna be yet because I'm only this far in and like he's gonna die tomorrow, so how is there a whole book ahead of that? I'm very interested to see what ends up happening, but I'm enjoying it, and that's about it. So, and like I said, I'm also listening to Prisoner of Azkaban. So that's what I've been reading. I'm excited about all of the new books that I hauled in my previous video, and I'm excited to find out what you're reading. Let me know in the comments below because I'm always curious. Anyway, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!